For now, I do want to bring in Jack Jupin, retired supervisory special agent with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. He was operator and supervisor for the FBI SWAT team and is now CEO of Jupin International, where he actually teaches active shooting classes. Jack, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and help, discuss all of this further as all of this is developing here.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. Unfortunately, we have this conversation too often, right? It happens again. I have college-age girls, and it's a horrible, horrible incident. What I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, I've already spoken to several FBI agents on the ground. They're working hand in hand, and like all your other guests have said, working hand in hand with the local officials, the state police, the county, Florida State Police, Florida State University Police have done a fantastic job. The response from what I'm hearing was immediate, responsive, right to the threat situation, and they handled this situation. There is one in custody, to what I understand, and I believe one is deceased. But concerning most is there were two shooters. That is, and I believe one of your other guests had mentioned this, I believe a homicide detective from Washington, D.C. This was a planned event. This wasn't happenstance. It wasn't somebody who got mad at the last minute. This was planned and done with a purpose. I don't know if the targets were planned of who they were looking to hurt. Was it anybody or was it specific? Law enforcement's going to find that out. And we're going to find out a lot more once the investigation continues. And as multiple guests have already said, and I'll reiterate it, they got to slow it down now. The incident is now what we believe is over. And now the investigation really starts. And that's with social media, bank records, phone records, internet records. They're going to look at everything. And we're going to work hand in hand. The FBI will work hand in hand. And as we always like to say, the local guys were the first people there. We're here to help and provide resources. And that's what we do best. And we can give them every resource that local and state law enforcement need.
Yeah, and right now there is a lot of information that is overly preliminary, so we're waiting on details. Right now, investigators have not, said anything about the number of shooters. We were just talking about that. That is something that's kind of come through social media, but of course we're working to kind of confirm that. The Associated Press saying right now that a shooter is in custody and that 6 people were taken to a hospital, one of them in critical condition. Again, we're working to kind of piece all of this together, but I did want to ask you overall, the law enforcement response to something like this. How does the FBI respond to a school shooting, a shooting that's happening on a busy college campus?
Well, it's a tough situation, and the rules have changed. Obviously, we've all mentioned Columbine. They changed after Columbine. It used to be wait, get 2-3 law enforcement officials, and then go to the crisis site. That no longer exists. If you're the first guy there with the gun, you're going to the crisis site. You're going to find it, and you're going to identify it, and you're going to neutralize the threat. That is what we are trained to do. We work hand in hand with our local, state, county partners and law enforcement all the time on a SWAT team. We train together, we work together, we help each other, we exchange different ideas on tactics on how to handle it. But one rule is in effect. If you're the first guy there, go to the threat. And that's what we're doing. That whether it's an FBI agent that's off duty, but 99% of the time it is the local police, or in this case, Florida State University law enforcement, that were able to get to the threat as well. Unfortunately, the FBI is not always going to be on scene. It's one of those situations that, whoever's there first, you go to the threat and neutralize.
And you're taking a look at just some of the live images that we do have right now. We have several different affiliates that are in that area. We also have this traffic camera coming from Florida 511. You can see the road still shut down. there is less of a police presence in this location than we saw earlier, but that's because, of course, they have moved closer to campus as the investigation is underway. Again, we haven't seen any news conference called just yet. I can assume there will be later on today. So once there is, we'll make sure, of course, to bring you that here live and in full. That's what we do. Can you talk a little bit about the FBI's role overall? As you said, local police, responded here. Everyone kind of works together. So explain the role of a federal agency in an investigation like this.
Well, an investigation like this, Josh, we're here to help. And I mean that in the truest sense of the word. The FBI will give every resource that we absolutely have, especially our laboratory, our cyber division, our tactical teams, of course, will help them because, believe it or not, even though the crisis might allegedly be over, every building, every dorm, everything has to be cleared. It has to be secured. And we'll give them the resources that they need to do this. We can prosecute. The beauty of this is we can prosecute people locally or federally. And we have jurisdiction, they have jurisdiction. And, we like to go for the biggest bang for the buck of where we can put somebody away that is involved in this type of heinous crime that happened. And we can put them away a lot longer sometimes under federal statutes. But that being said, this individual that is allegedly in custody can be charged with state crimes and federal crimes. And the FBI will give every resource. The United States Attorney's Office will give every resource, and that's what we'll end up doing. And it's going to be long and painstaking. This will not be done in a week. I can promise you that. This is going to be months and months of investigation. A lot of work has to go into this.
And talking a little bit more about the response, we had a 511 camera a bit earlier as all of this was developing. And as you can imagine, there were police, law enforcement from different agencies that were there on the scene blocking the roads in very large numbers. So when an agency does get to a scene like this, how do they assess if there is maybe a larger situation, if there is more of an issue there, if there's still a threat on campus?
Well, that's a very good question, Josh, because even every student, every faculty member, everybody coming out of there, law enforcement does not know who is the good guys, who are the bad guys. So in a case like this, unfortunately, and this is exactly what I teach in my class, when I teach active shooter training, you don't know who the good guys or bad guys are. You can't expect law enforcement to know that ahead of time. So everybody's will be searched. Everybody will be asked to put their hands up, show your hands. There will be guns out. There will be weapons out. And they will identify every individual coming in or out of that scene to identify who's good and who's bad. They don't know. And it's a very, very hard investigation to do when you have to make instant decisions. Shoot, don't shoot. You don't know who's going to come out and pull a gun on you as you're walking in through the scene because somebody put their hands up for a second. So every individual has to be looked at as they come out of a scene. And as law enforcement goes to clear each and every building, every room, they have to identify everybody. And it's painstaking. It's probably very traumatic for a lot of people. And that is very, very unfortunate, but it's how it has to happen. Law enforcement has to make sure that they have neutralized the threat, and they don't know where the threat was, is, or who.
And you kind of already touched on this a little bit, but when we talk about down the line, as you mentioned, this is going to be a lengthy investigation. This isn't something like you see on TV in a TV show where they know by the end of an hour. When you look at social media and the role all of that plays in this, obviously videos started circulating very quickly, pictures, as all of this was unfolding, some information that was accurate, and as you'd imagine, some information that was not accurate. Can you explain the role that social media does play in all of this?
Social media is absolutely essential in an investigation like this. Unfortunately, Nobody can predict what's going to happen, what somebody's going to do or not do. In a case like this, there are sometimes telltale signs that someone's about to do something. Sometimes they're very blatant and put it on social media. I'm going to shoot up a school today. I'm going to do this today. I'm going to do that today. It's not always that, but also, too, another thing that we have to think about is what I like to teach in my classes is situational awareness. We all know who the one individual is, two individuals that whether they're not part of the crowd, they're bullied, they're this or they're that. And people can keep an eye out for things and just be aware of your surroundings, the people around you. Are they acting abnormally? Are they dressing abnormally? You're in South Florida. Are you wearing an oversized coat when it's 85 degrees? That's kind of a sign that maybe you have something underneath that coat. There's a lot of things that you can look for ahead of time, but social media, and they trust me, they will be scrubbing the social media of both of the individuals, allegedly both. One I understand may be deceased, and one is in custody. But the social media will be looked at excruciatingly. They will look at every bit of it, and they'll go back and trace as long as they can on every social media outlet.
And I can tell you a lot of the information that has come in here, we've heard from Florida Democrats there, and they actually put out a statement. So I think that's where a lot of folks are getting that information about two shooters. They put out a statement and said there were two shooters. Obviously, as we mentioned, we're still waiting on a news conference, some official preliminary information, but what we know so far, pretty vague. I did want to ask you, as we get this first news conference, once it does happen, we don't have a time or anything of that nature, but when we get it, what kind of questions do you think could potentially be answered? I imagine we're not going to get an answer as to a motive as of right now. That's still under investigation. But what questions do you think could potentially be answered?
Josh, you're going to get very little information. I'll be very honest with you. And that's a very smart thing that law enforcement will do. The fact that politicians are already coming out and making statements, it's unfortunate. Nobody should be talking about anything right now. And law enforcement, and for the exact reason you just said, there is no press conference yet. And when there is a press conference, law enforcement will give you what they know, but they will not they're not going to speculate. That's what politicians do. That's not what law enforcement will or should do. And I'm sure they won't. I'm sure that law enforcement will give it'll probably be the chief of police, which is the appropriate person to do this. Maybe the FBI will be there, Florida State University police, but it's in their hands right now. They're not going to speculate. They're going to tell you what we know, how many are unfortunately hurt, injured, deceased. They'll tell you that. But they're not going to get into any details whatsoever about the investigation or the crime scene.
And as you were speaking right there, we just actually got word from the Associated Press that it appears that there will be a news conference in just about an hour. That's set for 4 p.m. Eastern time. That is, of course, preliminary information, so that could change. We've seen these news conferences before where they are called and then they kind of switch up the time. We're, of course, going to carry that in full, commercial-free, all of that once it gets underway. And I want to call your attention to what we're looking at now. This is a live image, one of the few that is remaining because, as you'd imagine, this is an active investigation. So many reporters, photographers, they have been moved from the college campus further and further as this is still an active scene with federal and local officers there. I do want to pop up before we get into our next question here, just some of the posts here on X that we are getting from different officials. We know that President Trump has been briefed on all of this. It's not clear if he will be making a statement as well, but Attorney General Pam Bondi posting the FBI is on the scene at Florida State, and we are in communication with agents on the ground. Our priority is the safety of everyone involved. We will keep updating as we learn more, praying for all. We also heard from Kash Patel, the FBI director, posting, "My team and I have been briefed on the tragic shooting at Florida State, and our FBI Jacksonville team is on the ground assisting. We will provide full support to local law enforcement as needed. Please keep the FSU community in your prayers." Again, that news conference set to take place at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We will, of course, keep you updated if that time does change. Jack, I do want to talk a little bit more here about how different agencies learn from situations like this. I'm sure when you have a situation like this, previously there had been an active shooter situation, a mass shooting that took place years ago at FSU. Officials there, campus police, other agencies responding probably use that as a learning experience. As bad as that sounds, it is a way that they can learn in case something like that does happen again.
1000% correct, Josh. It's unfortunate that we're actually having this conversation about that, but the FBI and law enforcement in general, local, state, county, feds, we all learn from every situation that happens, whether it be a bombing, whether it be an active shooter, whether it be any other type of criminal investigation. Lessons are learned, and they hence we go forth and we train to exactly how to handle things. What could we have done differently? Unfortunately, in 23 years at the FBI, I saw a lot of bad stuff: bombings, terrorist attacks, homicides, you name it, I saw it. And unfortunately, we have to go back and then we have to see what did we do wrong? We debrief it. We debrief everything. And then some of it actually turns into training. And how could we do things better and more efficiently, effectively? Most of it comes down to communications, things like that, comms, we call it. You always have to have better comms with each other. And that's essential, and especially an active shooter situation. Because like I mentioned earlier, the good guys don't know who the bad guys are. So you have to kind of assume everybody could be a potential bad guy. So in a case like this, communication is essential between local, state, feds that are on scene and work the problem, as we would say.
Yeah, and again, we're still awaiting this 4 p.m. Eastern Time news conference. That's when, as you said, we could get a little bit more information. But I mean, we're just about 3 hours removed from the first alert being sent out by FSU. So that leads to, it's early in the investigation. There's not a lot of information. You have to kind of wait to get that. As you can see, students are kind of walking around campus. The last information we got from FSU is that they said this is still a very active scene. They want to make sure that everyone kind of shelters in place still as they work to probe this, to piece all of this together and, make sense of it, if that makes sense. Now, Jack, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and discuss all of this a little bit further. Is there anything else that you want to add here before I let you go?
Like everybody else is saying, and I believe in the same thing, our prayers go out to the families, to the community. I saw before you had a pastor on who has a child there at the university. And, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific that this has happened and continues to happen. Unfortunately, it's the world we live in now. And, law enforcement, I promise you, is doing the best they can to prepare for these types of situations. But unfortunately, we can't always prevent them.
And I know that you do teach active shooter training. So, I mean, you have obviously the experience with all of this. Thank you so much for joining us here and helping to provide some context on all of that. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Thanks.